So again, my name is Laurie Snorek. I am a full-time Christian Science practitioner. I work with people who are relying on prayer for healing. And I work with people all over the world on text and video chat and over the phone and in person as well. And everything that you're going to hear today comes from my practice of Christian Science. And so that's what we'll be talking about. The title is The Healing Power of Stillness. And to start off, I'll just give you a little advice that I was given when I was a graduate student. And I was going into a talk one weekend, and I was really looking forward to hearing the speaker. And my professor said to me, he said, Laurie, people will go and they take notes and they pay attention to what the speaker says, but rarely do they at the same time pay attention to what their own heart is saying while they're listening. And he said to me, I want you to pay attention to that message, because that's what you need to hear this weekend. And I'll say the same thing to all of you today who are here with us on the web, that as you're listening or watching or wherever you are, or maybe you're listening to the recorded version later, that as you listen to me share from my heart, my own stories, my insights, my perspective, I hope you hear your own heart speaking and pay attention to that message, to what's coming up in your own heart, because that's the real message that you need for this hour together that we'll spend. So that's the real message you came for. All right, so this talk, The Healing Power of Stillness, has come really out of my own life experience. And I have 2 children, and I've worked full-time most of their lives. And so it comes from really looking to find that balance between work and family, and to really prove it in my own experience. And stillness has been a really integral practice to finding peace and finding that calm that allows us to get done all of the incredible demands on our time that we have on any given day. And there's a story that inspired me years ago that I like to start with, and you can see on your screen The Cellist of Sarajevo. And this is a true story. It's about a man who is from Sarajevo, and he one day he goes into the center square of Sarajevo, and he sits down in a plastic chair, and he takes out his cello and he starts to play. And as you can see in the picture here, he's dressed in full formal concert dress. And he starts to play, but in the background, there are artillery shells falling on buildings and people running for cover, and people are hiding in their homes because it's the start of the Bosnian Civil War. And this man, Vedran Smalovic, doesn't just come into the center square one time, but he comes back for 22 consecutive days to commemorate the 22 men, women, and children that were killed at the start of the war whilst just standing in a bread line. He wanted to commemorate their lives, those 22 lives that were taken at the start of the war. And he didn't have the skills to broker a ceasefire between the warring factions and the political factions of his country, but he had his music. And so, kind of regardless of his own safety, he goes into the midst of the city and he plays his cello. And the reason this speaks to me of stillness is because stillness for me is really not about changing our outside environment so that we can find peace and stillness. It's about looking within. It's a mental environment. It's what allows us to be in the most chaotic situation, to encounter the busiest day, to be in the midst of chaos or disruption or discouragement, and to still find stillness. Because it doesn't require that outside change. That even in the midst of a war zone like this man, we can find it. Now, I hope that many of you listening, most of you listening, haven't been in a war zone. It won't ever be in this kind of a war zone or in the middle of this kind of destruction. But on any given day, we can ask ourselves, what's bombarding our own thought? And in the midst of all of this bombardment in my own thinking, how can I find that stillness and that calm and practice getting it every single day? And for some, I know that's a practice of maybe prayer or studying in Christian Science, we have a Christian Science weekly Bible lesson that we often study on a daily basis. And it, for me at least, it brings a sense of calm and uplifted thought and something to ponder. It takes me from where I was thinking into a new realm of thinking every time. Some people will just get quiet, maybe before bed or first thing in the morning, just sit really quietly, and whatever it is that works. The stillness we're looking for is about quieting all that mental chatter that will try to come up and distract us and pull us into ways of thinking that are not constructive and not peaceful and not still. And the stillness is really underneath all of the chaos that life can seem to look like. It's always there. You're not going to go find it by doing some kind of particular meditation or a particular prayer or doing some specific thing. We find it within our own hearts. It's already there. In the Bible, it talks about communing with your own heart to find stillness, because that's where we find it. Someone sent this to me a few years ago. It says, at the center of the most turbulent heart, there is a place of peace, a place beyond time that cannot be touched by change or loss. No tumult can disturb the quietness. No shadow can dim the light. Here, in this stillness, is rest and healing. Nothing we suffer, nothing that we fear, can damage its perfection. Now, I hope you can hear in this that sense that stillness is already it's already part of our being. But that's the key. This whole talk is really about our being. And sometimes we can get really caught up in thinking that we're human doings, all the things that we have to do. In fact, it's always struck me how in America, as a young child in school, teachers will ask you, and maybe this happens in Europe and Australia and other places too, but teachers will often, or used to when I was a kid, used to ask little children what they want to be when they grow up. And they use that being verb, what they want to be. But they're asking really for what you want to do. And recently, I just read a posting from somebody I'm connected to on LinkedIn, and they were saying when they were a kid, they responded to that question, what do you want to be when you grow up, with happy. I want to be happy. And the teacher said he was wrong. That was the wrong answer. Because we're focused, that question tends to bring us into, I'm going to be a fireman, I'm going to be a librarian. That was my goal when I was young. But there's in this goal-oriented, what we're going to do with our lives. But what I learned at an early age, and it was actually in my first job outside of school, I was working in a human rights organization, and I was super impressed by all the people there. They were doing incredible work around the world. They were saving lives and running campaigns and doing things that would just help mass numbers of people. But two of the people who were doing some of the most amazing work could not get along with each other, and they had their desks next to each other in the office. So when they were in the office together, there was a lot of tension and conflict. And it wasn't fun conflict. It wasn't happy arguing intellectually. It was real, it was tense, and it was walking on eggshells type of conflict. And at one point, they took their desks, they got in such a fight, they pushed their desks to the opposite end of this huge sort of warehouse room where we were, where our offices were, and they faced the wall so they didn't have to look at each other. And I just thought, that was a turning point for me, from thinking it's not really about being a human doing, about what we do in the world. Now, some work obviously seems to have more of an impact than others. It's obviously important what we do, what we're called to do. We should do what we're called to do. But it's how we're doing it that can really make a difference. And I'm convinced that you can be in the most mundane job, or something that doesn't seem to be making a lot of difference, or something that seems to be very small. And it's how you do it. And if you do it with that sense, that quietness, that sense of stillness, the sense of peace, with that real sense of just calm, it permeates in some way or another the atmosphere around you, and it does have an effect. And so it doesn't matter if you're off doing human rights work in other parts of the world, and that's a fantastic thing to do, or if you're just a stay-at-home mom and changing diapers all day and it feels very small. But how you do what you do does have an impact. And that's really what we're here to talk about, that when we do things, when we attack our to-do list with stillness, or when we drive our parents to the grocery store, or we're taking our kid to school, or we're going into a church meeting, when we do those things from a place of stillness, it changes the impact we have on those things. So that's the question. How do we find that stillness? How do we maintain it when we're tempted to be derailed or pulled into reaction? And how does it have an effect on the world? And those are the three topics for today. We'll talk about looking at stillness for ourselves, stillness for our relationships with others, and practicing stillness in light of world events that can try to really get us pulled off kilter into feeling agitated. One of the analogies that has helped me over the years to think about stillness is related to this cello that you see on your screen. And it's really about, it can work with a violin as well. But at one point, as I was sitting in a music lesson with one of my children, they both play violin and cello, the teacher had turned on the tuner. And the tuner it plays a pure, perfect tone. And then the child started to play their instrument, and inevitably it was out of tune, and you could hear this vibration because it's not in sync with that pure, perfect tone. But then you see the little black knobs on the bottom of this cello. Well, the violin has them too. And if you turn them, they're called the fine tuning knobs, and it brings the instrument perfectly in line with that pure, perfect tone. So it just lines up. And when it lines up, if you close your eyes in the room, it sounds like oneness. It just sounds like there's one tone being played, not two things. You do not hear a separation. You don't hear the violin here and the tuner over here. I closed my eyes one day, I tried, and you can't hear the two distinct tones. You hear just one tone because they're so perfectly in tune. And Mary Baker Eddy at one point was talking to some of her students, and she used this analogy. She said, keep your violin in tune. She said, if your violin is in tune, you have no need to tune it. Now, keeping your violin in tune means to consistently, throughout the day, be tuning up. For example, a violinist or a cellist, if they tune in the morning, and then they have to give a lesson, and then they have to play a concert, and then they have a rehearsal later, they don't rely on that morning tuning to last them till the end of the day. And I think sometimes I have been tempted to do this with prayer or stillness or practice, that I get up in the morning, I like to wake really early, and that I'll take that quiet time, but that once my day starts, once my kids get up and I have to take them to school, or I have to answer the phone or run off to work and some work on a project, that I'll just kind of move into the doing part of my day, hoping that that morning prayer time will kind of, I don't know, unconsciously kind of carry me through to the end of the day. But when I was thinking like this years ago, what I would find is at the end of the day, you feel depleted, and then you wake up the next day and you do it all over again. What I've been realizing with this keep your violin in tune analogy is that the point is really to start off the day with that quiet stillness, but to maintain it throughout the day, or to tune back in throughout the day. So constantly be retuning, which is what a violinist has to do. And the way they do it is by listening. They do it because when they listen, when they hear that their instrument is slightly out of tune, they just tune it right back up. And because they're constantly checking on it and retuning it, it's not a big deal to tune it back to that pure, perfect tone, to that oneness. And for us, what tuning means, I think, for me, is that when I remember that my being part is always in tune, always at one with God, with divine love, then the stillness, what I'm doing is I'm just remembering that throughout the day, connecting with that reality, that truth, that no matter what it says during the day, that I feel tired or annoyed or whatever kinds of things might come up, or feeling empty, or feeling like we need spiritual replenishment, or we haven't been close to God in a particular amount of time, that like getting really still is that tuning, is that little like fine tuning, and it reconnects us to our being, And then we can go into what we have to do with a different mindset. All right, so these are the two books in Christian Science, the Bible and the Science and Health book with Key to the Scriptures. So they go together. Christian Science is based in Christianity. It's based on the Bible. It's based on following Jesus' teachings. And the Science and Health book explains the science of spirituality, the science of Christianity, which basically, if you think of what a science means, it's basically saying the authority for what you know comes from testing it out. And that's essentially what the Science and Health book says, is that here's a way to take what's in the Bible and put it into practice in your life and test it out so that your authority comes from your own experience with it, not from hearing somebody tell you it or listening to a pastor or preacher at church or just on faith alone because, well, the Bible says it, so I must have faith. But the Science and Health book really takes it and says, it's a science, put it into practice, test it out, live it in your experience, see what difference it makes. And that's where you get your authority for the ideas of Christianity. Mary Baker Eddy wrote it. She's the author, and she discovered what she calls Christian Science in 1866 when she had an experience of being diagnosed with something incurable and was cured by just reading the Bible. And then she spent the rest of her life investigating what had happened to her and how other people could do the same thing and put it into practice in their lives. Now, for today, our talk, the keynote idea from the Bible is be still and know that I am God. And this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It's actually in the midst of a very turbulent psalm. So if you turn to Psalms 46 in your free time, you'll see that it talks about the mountains shaking and the earth being troubled and the waters are troubled and everything's falling into the sea. And if you look at these beautiful mountains that you can see on your screen here, I mean, they look pretty solid, right? But if you can imagine there being an earthquake strong enough that they're crumbling into the sea, that would be quite a disturbing image. Well, that's what this psalm is referring to, it's talking about. And then at the end of it, it has this little phrase, be still and know that I am God. And I don't know what you hear in that, hopefully many things, but there's two things I hear. There's the being part, how we're supposed to be still, to calm ourselves, to maybe stop what we're doing, maybe pause what we're doing, at least mentally, if not physically. And then to fill up with this sense of God. Now, what is God exactly? What do we mean when we talk about God? Well, there are many, many, many terms for God in the Bible. And on any given day, some make more resonance, have more resonance with me than others based on what I'm dealing with, I guess. But what I've been finding is that the importance of understanding God is to see it as this power, this divine power that's all encompassing, like the sunlight, that doesn't discriminate based on age or economy or where you're from or race or gender, anything. It really just is available for everybody equally. The same way that the sunlight doesn't discriminate against certain parts of a city based on who deserves more sunlight. You don't have to earn the sunlight, it just comes. It's just the way the universe is ordered. And it's the same with God's love. That God is not a personification of an image of a man or woman that is looking at us and judging us to see whether or not we're doing well enough and whether or not we deserve that love. That God is that all-encompassing universal love that's impartial. And that knowing that power, when we're tuned in to that power and we feel that oneness with God, we feel the God-like sense of our own selves. We feel that we are like those rays coming out from that sun, that we're the outcome of what God is doing. There's no separation. It's not a separate being that we pray to, hoping he'll intervene in our lives somehow. It's not that. It's a power that encompasses every one of us, that we are at one with, that we are encompassed in that idea of God, that we are God-like. Now, Mary Baker Eddy talked about how to hear this, and she said that we hear God when the senses are silent. Pretty simple. But getting our senses quiet can be really challenging. And we have to be honest with ourselves as to whether or not our senses are really being quiet. Because sometimes the chatter in our heads can be so loud that we think we're hearing divine spirit, but in reality, it's still just part of our own thinking that's racing around. Okay, so we'll talk a little more about how do we get there? How do we do this? This is just a picture of Mary Baker Eddy, and I just wanted to highlight a couple things about stillness from her. I've learned so much from her in my own life, just from her experience and what she wrote in her writings. And I find it instructive that she at one point was living in Boston and felt that she needed to move back to her home state of New Hampshire to write, to revise her science and health book. And she just talked about that sense of needing to find, to be away from sort of the hubbub of the city and kind of go into the closet and to really kind of find that sense of stillness. And she felt that she was this honest investigator of truth, that she looked within and it was really kind of sort of a spiritual questioner, and she explored the inner workings of spirituality at her whole life, and that's what her writings are really about. So in part one, let's look at how we take that idea of stillness that's for ourselves. What does Christian Science and Mary Baker Eddy's writings say about how we find it for ourselves, and what impact can it have on our lives in terms of healing? All right, well, this image that you have up on your screen is an image of a spinning top. And what I love about this is that if you spin a top and you look at it from a distance, it can look very still, but it might be moving really fast. But at the core of it, it's rooted. It's kind of, it's the outside parts that are kind of moving really quickly, but there's a stillness at the core of it. So with this kind of idea in mind of keeping that stillness at our core, go ahead and open up your chat box again. So I see we got lots of people chatting in. Hello, nice to see you. It's saying hello, so I know you're out there. That's great. So this is your chance to just chat a few things, and I'll repeat them so everybody can hear what they are. But what we're going to do, what I'd like you to chat in about is just, if you think about what it looks like for you to be really at peace with yourself, just chat that in the box. Well, how do you know? How do you know that you're really feeling at peace with yourself? What does it look like for you? So go ahead and just whatever phrases come to mind or whatever might happen. So for example, and I'll give you an example while you're typing. One of the things that for me really tells me that I'm feeling a sense of being at peace is that I'm not tempted so much to judge others or myself very harshly, that I'm willing to that I just don't feel that interest in judging others. It's more a sense of love and openness. All right, someone talked about that when you feel at peace with yourself, there's a calmness and you're not thinking about yourself. Which is great. Your thought is off of yourself when you're really at peace. You're not worried about how you come across to others, or you're not feeling self-conscious. You're not feeling so insecure. You're just feeling really at peace and trusting that the world is going to unfold in the way that it needs to. So that's a great characteristic. Somebody else, Samantha, said it feels light, calm, not frenzied, not burdened. So that sense of just feeling that, I love that sense of being unburdened, the sense of feeling light and calm, and not frenzied. Yeah, you know, there's a book a few years ago I saw, I can't remember, it was something like Beyond Frenzy or something, or living without frenzy. And I just thought that word is so funny, frenzy, but the word even has that sort of harried anxiousness to it. And I just think that's true. When we're really at peace with ourselves, we're living in the moment. We're not thinking about the future. We're not looking to the past. We're not ruminating over what might have happened, worried about it, or concerned about what's happening in the future. We're trusting and we're willing to go with it, not feeling burdened or frenzied about it. Someone else said, free of criticism. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, we're free of criticizing ourselves and criticizing others. We don't feel the need to criticize. It's a great sense of freedom, a really good sense of freedom. Someone else said getting messages from God, that when we're really at peace with ourselves, we hear what she's calling angel messages. So these little messages that come that are unbidden, that we don't think of them, they're not in our own mind, they're just coming to us, and they're direct from God to us, and that we feel those when we're really at peace with ourselves. That's great. Someone else, Joel, said feeling grateful. Yes, exactly, that we feel grateful. And joyful. Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, feeling joyful. When we're really at peace with ourselves, we just have this sort of overflowing sense of joy. It's not really tethered to a circumstance or to something outside of us changing, like getting a big check in the mail or paying off all our debt or maybe having our kids behave for the first time or whatever it might be. But it's really about having that joy first and bringing it to wherever we are. There's just a couple more and then we'll move on. But it says, one person said, like floating on a calm sea of love. I love that. And what's really cool about that is that, and I like that that's what it feels like to feel at peace with yourself, because when you're floating on that sea, you're really trusting. If you're just floating, you're not paddling, right? To take this analogy, you're trusting where you're going to get to. You know, you're trusting that either the current will take you where you need to go, or that you're going to be moved in the way that you need to move, and you're just trusting that, and you're willing to let it unfold rather than having to control it all the time. That's really key, I think, that you're willing to let life and things unfold rather than having to be in control all the time. And then finally, the last two ideas, somebody said being in the moment, not apprehensive about what's coming, or about mistakes or missed opportunities, that we don't dwell in the mistakes or the missed opportunities in the past. And then finally, and that's really key, that's so important, that's that living in the present moment. And then finally, the last one, calm, quiet connection with inner peace and outer space and one with nature. Yeah, excellent. So feeling that oneness again, I think connection is a key word for me of thinking about stillness, because we feel connected to others, we feel connected to nature, we feel connected to just life in general. We don't feel isolated, but being really at peace, we feel that connection. All right, so let's remember this vision for a second of all of these qualities and all of the list that we just made of gratitude and joy and letting things unfold, living in the present moment, being willing to let go of control. And I'm just going to tell you a brief story. And it occurred about over 10 years ago now, quite a while ago, I guess. But I used to have this challenge with these reoccurring kind of stiffness in my neck when I would wake up from sleeping. And it would be sort of inconvenient and not very fun, but I would go about my day. And as I had done before, and because it's sort of my practice, I would often pray for myself about this. I would work with ideas from the Bible and the Science and Health book. And I really believe and have found in my experience that there's a mental nature to almost everything we deal with in terms of illness or physical issues. And sometimes we can, you know, it doesn't mean that we're causing it, but it just means that there's a mental disturbance that we can address. And so I was wanting to address it mentally first and really sort of see the effects that prayer could have on it. But I wasn't finding regular relief from the challenges. So they would go away, but they would come back, and I would have this stiff neck, and I would wake up and not have slept very well, and would kind of live through it and then hope it would go away or whatever, but it wasn't really being healed fully. And then I had an experience where I just was experiencing so much stress in my life. I think it was one of the highest pressured times of my experience. It was right around the holidays, and I had a really heavy workload and kids and patient responsibilities. I had a huge amount of things that felt like they were on my shoulders. And I woke up and had a pretty stiff neck and couldn't really turn it in different directions, and decided to start praying about it. But my prayer was a little along the lines of, okay, God, I really need a healing quickly, because I have so many things to do on my plate that I've got to get healed so I can get on with all the stuff that I have to do. So let's get going. And hopefully you can hear in that prayer who is at the center of it, which was really me and the problem that I was dealing with. And it was one of those instances where I didn't realize it, but I was sort of calling on God as kind of an interventionist God. So come in and intervene in my life and help me with healing so I can get on with doing the things I need to do. And sometimes I think in praying this way, we even get into the habit, at least I have, of looking up ideas in the Bible or the Science and Health book and trying to find things that apply to the problem. And it's sort of a problem-solving approach to prayer. But needless to say, it didn't work for me. So that first day went by, the second day went by. By the third day, I was forced to stay in bed. It was so excruciatingly painful. I'd never experienced anything like this before. And just walking would send these shooting pains up the back of my spine. So I had to sit really still and try to get comfortable and not move a muscle. And in that process of getting physically quiet and not trying to do all the things I felt really responsible for, I started to get my senses quiet too. And all that mental chatter, I just tried to really pull away from it and be really in that present moment and listen. Like it was a major tuning moment. Like I'd gotten way out of tune and I needed to tune myself back in, to tune out all of the things that were chattering and to really tune into that one divine voice from God. So as I did that, and as I was really quieting all those racing thoughts that were coming to me, I heard this message say, "I am the shepherd." And I took that to mean that was a direction from Spirit, from God. And as I thought about it, I realized that if God was the shepherd, if I was thinking of God, like the 23rd Psalm says, as a shepherding power, then my job was to be a sheep. But I realized I didn't like the idea of being a sheep. That I had actually grown up sort of being biased against the sheep, because sheep to me were these, I think I was even told once, don't ever be a sheep, by a teacher in grade school. But what she meant was don't ever be a blind follower, mostly with your friends, which is good advice. But in this case, it had meant that I had devalued a lot of the qualities of sheep. And if you're near your chat, if you want to chat some in, go ahead and just chat a few qualities of the sheep that you're thinking about. Like, what are the good qualities of sheep? If you think about it, if these analogies in the Bible, especially the 23rd Psalm, but that God is the shepherd, that there's a shepherding influence for us, then it puts us in that relationship of sheep. And how often do we think about those qualities? Well, I had not been thinking about them at all. I had felt like the shepherd of shepherding my family and my projects and everything. But here are some of the qualities of sheep that you all are sharing. Meekness is one, which is a great quality. Mary Baker Eddy actually wrote that meekness is the armor of a Christian. The armor. It's a strength, it's a protection. It's not a weakness at any point. It's not about kind of hunkering down, sort of making ourselves smaller, but it's really about feeling that protection by being meek, by letting go of our concept of our personality maybe and our ego, so we can feel that shepherd influence. Great. Meekness. Trust is another one. Good. Gentleness. Two people wrote gentle and gentleness. Yeah, the sheep are so gentle. They don't push. They don't insist on getting their way. They don't try to influence or coerce or anything like that or manipulate. They just follow along. They just trust that shepherd. And they also know, someone wrote this, they know the voice of the shepherd. And it's true, they know the voice of the shepherd better than any other sound or voice. They're patient. Someone said they're patient. Yep. So these qualities of the sheep were things I started to think about, and to think about to what extent I was living them out in my life. And I realized I really hadn't been thinking about them at all, because I'd been feeling in charge, in control. I'd been feeling like everything was on my plate, on my shoulders. I had this thought that, I want everything done really well with a quality of excellence. And so I have to do it. I have to be in charge, or else it just won't get done well. And I don't think that means we lower our standards, but can you see how that puts all the pressure on us to feel so in charge? And what shifted for me in this experience was understanding that to shepherd our projects, we first have to know how we are shepherded. To shepherd our kids or our church members or our family members or other things that are going on in our lives, to be a really effective shepherd of any particular project or idea of any sort, we have to know how we're being shepherded by God. And that's what makes it effective. Now, there's a cartoon on your screen if you're on the phone, which I think we have at least one phone listener today, which is great. Welcome. I put up a little cartoon, and it's a picture of a sheep on a cell phone with a shepherd with a staff there, and there's a bunch of sheep in the background. And it says, "You can't unfollow me. I'm your shepherd." And of course, that's a reference to Facebook, that you can't unfollow the shepherd because you're always connected. And what I love about this idea is that we're always at one with God. We're always connected. There's a passage Mary Baker Eddy says that helps, I think, with this idea of really finding that stillness in a way that calms us inside, that puts aside our preconceived notions, that does all of those things we talked about being at peace with ourselves. It focuses on our being, not on what we're doing, but on our being. And she says this, "To the burdened and weary, Jesus saith, Come unto me. There remaineth a rest for the righteous, a rest in Christ, a peace in love. The thought of it stills complaint. The heaving surf of life's troubled sea foams itself away, and underneath is a deep settled calm." I hope you can hear that. Again, in that sense, the stillness is there. Always, it's always deeply underneath whatever might be being troubled on the surface. And that's what happened to me in this experience, was that the trouble going on in my body, the stiffness in my neck, the frozenness of my shoulders and my neck slowly loosened up over that course of that day as I was letting go completely of the responsibility, the sense of control, the sense of holding on to things, the sense that I had to do it, that it was all on me, and felt the shepherding influence from God. And not only did it heal that experience that one time, but I never had the problem again. I don't wake up anymore with stiff necks all the time like I used to. But primarily because I stopped waking up in the morning, listing off all of my things to do and asking God for help. Instead, I started waking up and saying, "Good morning, God. What do you have in store for today? And how can I want only the things that you're giving? How can I want to accomplish only the things that you, divine love, intend for me to accomplish?" It's putting aside your own agenda, essentially, and really following that shepherding agenda. That the sheep don't have their own agenda. That's another one we didn't say, but sheep don't have their own agenda. They are willing to follow, and they only drink by still waters. They trust the shepherd will get them to the still waters so they can be nourished. I love that analogy and that idea. So to conclude with this part about stillness for ourselves, finding stillness is about quieting all the chatter in our heads. Sometimes it means pausing what we're doing, at least mentally pausing, if not physically. And often it just remembers to do it throughout the day, to not rely on just a quiet moment in the morning, but to find those quiet moments throughout the day. Maybe just pausing and getting really still for 10 seconds right before starting the car to go run errands. Or maybe it's just about pausing and really rooting ourselves in the present moment before we go pick up our children and listen to their chatter from their day, or whatever it might be. So again, stillness, and it leads to healing in that we hear in the stillness the voice of God, the connection with God that gives us ideas that transform our thinking, and it changes our bodies. It changes the way we experience things in life. All right, so let's now look at how does this relate to relationships with others? And the idea that really helps me in thinking about this is letting the same mind be in us, which was also in Christ Jesus. So this is your last opportunity to chat in stuff, but the idea here is, what does it look like to have the mind of Christ? So that's what you can chat into the chat box. What does it look like to have the mind of Christ? So there's Christ Jesus, who taught us all these wonderful things when he came here and did all of his teaching with his disciples. And then he left, and Paul continues his work. And in multiple ways, over multiple times, Paul says, "You have the mind of Christ," to the people he's teaching. But what does that mean exactly, that we have the mind of Christ? And what does it do for us? So somebody wrote in that it gives us compassion, right? It's a great sense of having that sense of compassion. I think of compassion as really the loving without expectation. That we love and we connect with and we feel loving towards others without expecting anything in return. I think related to that is empathy. And that empathy is the quality of being able to see from another person's perspective and understand what might be going on for them, but then also heal them. Like Jesus was able to see where people were, but then also lift them out of it. Okay, good. We have a bunch of things here. That the mind of Christ involves listening and then clear reflection. Thanks, Lauren, for that idea. That the mind of Christ is always tuned in to that oneness, right? It's always tuned in perfectly. And because of that, there's a clear reflection. That Samantha wrote, it's love without an object, just love pouring out. Isn't that fantastic? That love is just overflows. The mind of Christ allows us to love with the love that we get from God, as opposed to because people deserve it. And I think that's really key. Love meeting no return. Yes, exactly. It's love not worried about what we get in response, that we just love because it's how we're designed, not because we're looking for something. And then seeing others and ourselves in their true light as the reflection. We talked about reflection earlier, clear reflection, right? And that reflection mirrors the perfection of the original. It doesn't have anything in it that the original doesn't have. And then finally, a sense of harmony and compassion, Joel said. Thank you, Joel. And yeah, that harmony, that the mind of Christ is always in harmony with that oneness with God. I don't think that means that there's no sorrow, there's no feeling, because compassion is also a deeply feeling thing. And Jesus felt sorrow, he wept at certain times, but he was so connected to that divinity, to that divine sense, that even though, kindness, thanks, Noble, that the kindness was there. He was kind and compassionate, and people felt that. But he also was so in tune with that sense of divine harmony that he could see beyond the particular situation. And that is key to me for the mind of Christ, is being able to see beyond what's in front of us, beyond people's behavior, to the heart of the individual. Mrs. Eddy, Mary Baker Eddy defines Christ as this divine message from God to us. It speaks to the human consciousness, to each one of us. And when we get our information from this Christ idea, it changes what we see around us. And I'll just tell a brief story of a friend of mine who woke up one day and she had a rash all over her arms and her legs and her body, and was used to praying for healing. And so in this case, she did the same thing. And she was really listening for that divine voice from God about what she needed to know mentally. There were lots of suggestions from family about maybe what caused this, or what she had done, or if she'd eaten something, or a reaction or whatever. But she just wanted to find the mental stillness that would bring healing and would transform it, would allow the itchy rash to go away. But it kind of persisted throughout the day, and she wasn't finding a lot of relief from it until the end of the day. After all kinds of prayer and talk with her sister and sleeping, but nothing relieving it, she gets up and goes for a walk with her husband into the center of town. And she's just feeling kind of this agitation. Her sister had said to her, just calm your thoughts, just don't worry so much about things and stop being anxious. But she had so many things that she was being anxious about. And so as they go for this walk, they walk over a bridge, and there's this beautiful river, and the river is perfectly still on the surface. Like we talked about earlier about the raft floating on the sea, right? Floating on the calm of the sea, or somebody said just that clear reflection, right? So there was this perfect clear reflection. And the moon was reflected on the water, the surface of the water. And so my friend was watching the moon reflected, and then a breeze came up, and the breeze ruffled the surface of the water, and it looked like the moon split into 1,000 pieces. And then as she kept watching, the breeze died down and went away, and the moon on the surface of the water mended itself. And she immediately thought of this haiku poem. She's a writer. And so she immediately thought of this haiku poem that came into her head that said, broken and broken, again on the wave, how easily mends the moon. Broken and broken, again on the wave, how easily mends the moon. And she was so delighted by remembering this haiku poem that she got thinking about that sense of reflection and how the original moon hadn't had anything happen to it. It was just that breeze that had ruffled it. She went home thinking about all these ideas. Her thought really lifted off of herself. She fell asleep and she woke up the next morning and had no sign at all of the rash that had covered her whole body before. And what I think we can take from this in terms of our relationships with others, because it's a story kind of about her own healing, but I think that often our relationships with others feel like a reaction to something we see. In this case, it was a story of something she saw in her body. But I know in my case, I've had situations with family members where there's been these patterns and we've been tempted to just react to each other. But for me, it was when I really trusted this idea of the mind of Christ, that Christ idea, that if we just pause before we react to another person, it allows the Christ idea to come in and kind of interrupt the thought process and give us a new idea to think about. It's that divine message from God. And that we don't get our information about other people's behavior from their behavior. We get our information directly from that oneness with God. And that's what changes the way we see things. And it may mean that the person doesn't change their behavior, but if we change the way we think about it, it will change our interaction and our experience with them, regardless of whether their behavior changes. And it doesn't mean we condone bad behavior either, because if somebody's acting in a way that needs to shift, that it does need to shift. But we can only change our thought about it. And that love, that Christly compassionate love, can transform it in a way that sometimes criticism or bringing it up just doesn't. Mary Baker Eddy said, mind revolves on a spiritual axis, and its power is displayed and its presence felt in eternal stillness and immovable love. That spiritual axis means we get our thoughts about others directly from that divine mind, that Christ mind. Okay, so we're coming to a close here quickly, so I'm just going to go into the third topic now. And this one is about just really trying to find stillness in relationships to what's going on in the world. And I'll just relate a story that I heard when I worked in peace building years ago. And it's about a contest that was held for children. And the children were asked to draw what they thought peace looked like. So the children sent in their drawings, and the winning drawing was a picture of a rushing, roaring waterfall that was spilling down and kind of tumbling over the rocks. And right behind the waterfall on a little ledge sat a yellow canary. And the canary was pictured as singing. And that was what they chose to represent peace. All right, so think for yourself, like, why did they pick that picture? And throughout the time so far that we've talked about finding peace with ourselves by getting that vision of peace, what it looks like to find peace with ourselves. We've talked about how there's this Christ mind, this mind that's always tuned in, full of compassion and empathy and harmony. That is our own mind, really. And that those are the components, that's the vision of stillness that we're looking to find, that we're looking to connect with on a daily basis. It's a quality of being that we can bring to whatever we do. Now, in this case, the canary is sitting behind the waterfall. And someone great just chatted in, that for them, this idea of the canary is about, being undisturbed, even when what we see outside of us is really jarring. Undisturbed amid the jarring testimony of the material senses, right? That we remain undisturbed, like the canary. And think about it, the canary's voice is probably very small in light of the loudness of the waterfall. But does it care? I don't know. Is the canary concerned about it? Is the canary worried that its voice might be drowned out by the loudness and the rushing of the waterfall? Probably not. It's just singing because it's designed to sing, not because it's hoping that it will drown out the waterfall. I don't think it's meant to be in competition with the waterfall. That the canary is doing what it was designed to do. And no matter how rushing and roaring and loud that waterfall gets, it's going to keep doing and keep sharing the light that it is, and trusting that that will make a difference. And I think for me, the key element of really maintaining stillness when we're tempted to be pulled by world events is a lot of things that we've talked about today, like the Christ mind, sort of remembering that sense of the having that mind of Christ. It's really refocusing on the sense of being. How am I being right now, as opposed to what am I doing? When I first went to Kenya for the first time, a friend said to me, Laurie, we have a parable in our culture that says this, that we learn when we grow up. It says that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we listen twice as loud as we speak, or twice as much as we speak. And I think that's a great analogy for prayer, that when we hear something on the news, and it's easy to find ourselves drawn into talking about it with others, or rehearsing the negative ideas about it that really lead essentially to hopelessness, that our job is to really listen, to use that stillness to hear what we can hear, that we can offer to the conversation, that brings healing to the situation. Mary Baker Eddy wrote, the best spiritual type of Christly method for uplifting human thought and imparting divine truth is stationary power, stillness, and strength. And when this spiritual ideal is made our own, it becomes the model for human action. That stationary power and stillness is the model for human action, that when we connect with that we don't lose our voice like the canary, that we don't not share our voice, that we are like the canary, that we're willing to bring a little nugget to whatever the conversation is that might change the dialogue towards a more healing realm. But we can do that when we're looking first for, how am I feeling about this? What is going on for me in light of the news that I just heard? And we deal first with that in our own thought, that we find that stationary power rather than rehearsing it over and over and over, that just reinforces the hopelessness, the violence, the chaos, the disaster that our country's headed in, or some other country's headed in, that doesn't contribute to changing the future. But what does is getting close to that stationary power and stillness, that's the power, that's the strength. And when we get there, no matter how long it takes, even if it takes us a week, to find a sense of honest peace, to have compassion for somebody that doesn't deserve it, that's our enemy, to have forgiveness, or to love without return, even if it means we don't get what we want, that we keep loving, to do those things, that's a model. It becomes a model for human action, and it has an influence. Every time we do it for ourselves, it chips away at the blocks in the world, the mental blocks that are keeping people divided and keeping countries divided. All right, so that's basically what I have for you. I think we're close to the end of our hour, but I would love to just take any questions or comments that you have. So we have both the chat box open and the question and answer box. So this is your chance to chat in an idea or something that meant something to you, or something you liked, or something that you're puzzled about, or a question that you have. Go ahead and you can chat it into, generally I tell you the question and answer box because it records it. The chat box doesn't get recorded, I don't think, but it doesn't matter. You can chat it into whatever box you find on your screen if you'd like to add a perspective or ask a question. So this is your time. I'll just open it up to all of you to ask questions, or to pose questions, or to make comments. And I'll just, let's see, turn off the sharing here. And yeah, so just as we're finishing up, I just want to thank you all for joining. I'll stay open here for a few more minutes. If you have any, if you do have any questions, I'll just kind of stay open here on the chat for a few more minutes, about 10 minutes or so, and would love to sort of answer your questions individually. So if you chat them in the question and answer box, I can answer them individually or collectively, whatever you'd like. But overall, I'll just say thank you all for joining us today. It's been great to be with you. So I'll just take a few more questions and then we'll sign off in about 5 or 10 minutes. So one question that came in was how can we help others without being drawn into their drama and staying spiritually engaged? Thanks, Lauren. That is a great question. I think it's so tempting to get drawn into others' drama. And I had an experience last summer, actually. I was on a road trip with my kids and my sister, one of my sisters, and my mother. And we were in this car, this like 7-passenger van for 2 weeks going through Yellowstone. It was glorious. It was wonderful. But, we used to do this as kids, and now we're adults with my kids here. And so, just all these, there's so much temptation to be drama, family drama, and in all of this, in this kind of close quarters. And whatever the situation seems to be, whatever seem to be the conditions to create the drama, probably many of us can think about the way that we've had drama in our lives and how it gets created and justified. What was really clear to me on this trip was that, and I don't know exactly how this happened, but there was something within me that just refused to get drawn into the drama. And I guess I would explain it as that Christ idea, right? Because the Christ idea is not susceptible to other people's influence. If we connect with the Christ idea in ourselves, we're not so tempted to live in a reaction to other people, because we're listening louder to our own heart, what's in our heart, as opposed to what other people are doing. And I think that's the key. So there's this little, I don't know if any of you are still on. I guess a lot of you are, yeah, everybody's still on. So if you can see me on the screen, if you're on the phone, I'll describe it. But when I was in peace building, there was this little thing we used to do. And so if you just take your finger and point it kind of like a gun, with like your forefinger pointing forward and your thumb up, and you point it at somebody else, right? And so let's just say somebody else is having a tantrum. Adults still have these tantrums, I think, or having serious drama. And in your mind, you're kind of pointing your finger at them like, oh my gosh, here they go again, or I can't believe they're doing this again, or look at them go, or why are they doing this again? It's always focused on like, what's going on with this person. But what we used to do in peace building is as you point your finger this way and you notice there's one finger pointing toward the person, but how many fingers are pointing back towards you, right? So there's these 3 fingers that are pointing like back towards you. And this goes with a Bible passage about casting out before you cast the beam out of your, I'm not going to quote it correctly, but you have to cast the beam out of your own eye before you cast the mote out of your neighbor's eye. And the beam is the big thing and the mote is the small thing, and or the mite or whatever it is. But the idea, again, is with this little finger pointing thing, is that so often the drama, when we get pulled into drama, it's because we're letting ourselves get drawn into reacting to that person. And sometimes people just attract drama, and we sort of like it at first, and we get drawn in because it's enjoyable. But then, for me, those 3 fingers pointing back to us are about, hold on, how am I feeling about this? What do I really think about this? And I guess what happened for me on that road trip was just this conviction that analyzing the drama does nothing. And so when one family member who was going through a serious amount of drama one particular day, I mean, kind of crying and drama and yelling and very, very dramatic kind of experience. After the dramatic experience, the family member said, we need to talk about this, like analyze it. We need to deal with this. We need to talk through what happened and why, and what you did and what I did and I, for the first time in my life, I said, no, we don't have to talk about it. And I was worried I was being uncompassionate at first, but then I realized, because it had no reality, like I'd let it go completely. I wasn't holding on to it. I wasn't attaching it to this person. I really had no after effects of it. And I guess I only attribute that to peace and stillness and spirituality, and joy, and that just feeling that joy in ourselves means we don't have to get drawn in. We talked about meekness earlier as like an armor of a Christian. And I think that meekness allows us to, that it's the armor. It protects us from feeling like we have to get drawn into analyzing behavior. That what's even more effective than that is just to know, to be so convicted that that behavior had nothing to do with who that person was, and I'm not going to hold them to it. And it allows that person to grow and change. And that's what happened on our trip, that we didn't analyze the drama, we just moved on. And none of us held on to it for that person. And that individual grew immensely and was able to contribute in ways they may not have been able to if we'd all been analyzing forever what had happened. So anyway, that's just one experience. But I do think that being still, and kind of the other thing about the canary, right, is it's rooted on a rock. It's got that rock, it's got a solid foundation that it's sitting on. And so it's not trying to fly amidst the waterfall. It's really rooted on that rock. And I think that's really key for us too, to find that rock within ourselves that allows us to find that stillness, even if it means saying, I don't know how to respond to you right now, but I'm going to think about it, that I will get back to you, or I'm not sure, but I'm going to think about it, and really going back into ourselves and how am I feeling and what do I think about this, and hearing that voice directly from God. All right, there's 2 more questions or comments. I'll just comments, and I'll share these and then I'll sign off for you all. I am able to express love initially. However, if it's pushed out or run over, I ruminate and am disturbed and then get disconnected from myself. And I really hear that. It's really hard. We start to love unconditionally, but unconditional love is not something the world understands. Because you love without condition and you love without expectation. The world says you have to receive something in return. If they're not respecting you, you need to be respected. There's all kinds of conversation about that. But true unconditional love gives without expectation of return. And there's a difference between that unconditional love and the Bible talks about throwing your pearls before swine, like giving to somebody and letting them kind of trample on you, right? And there's a real difference there, because unconditional love is a power, and getting trampled on is a weakness, is like allowing ourselves to be abused or harmed in some way, and that's not ever okay. But I think that in this case, and this is noble, thank you for the question. I think that expressing that love, that it's very difficult to separate that giving of that love from what we expect, that we really hope it has an outcome, and that if the person pushes us away or just doesn't accept our love, or the relationship doesn't work out the way we're hoping, and we're still so loving, but the person's just not kind of coming toward us, I think that it just requires us to kind of go up even higher. And that can be really challenging, because we want to kind of stay on that level and keep loving. But if we stay on that same level and we're loving and the person's not taking it and they're pushing us away, we just end up feeling badly. But if we can go up higher than whatever this person's doing, it doesn't matter. And maybe that means we don't, I don't know the specifics, right? But maybe it means we don't do the same things we're doing that were really nice for that person if they keep pushing us away or whatever. But we keep going back to God and realizing that we love because God designed us to love, like the canary was designed to sing. So no matter how disturbing the picture got, the canary kept offering its voice. And I don't think that means we push, and I don't think that means we force anybody into anything. It's not at all about the other person. In fact, if we never see them again, or we never talk to them again, or they keep acting badly, we get to the place where it doesn't matter, because their behavior is about them. It's not so much about us. And we don't put ourselves in a situation where we get trampled on, but we also don't withhold our love, that we take our love even higher to where we feel we love because God first loved us. not because we need anything from anybody else. Anyway, that's, I think, a big concept, and it's a fine line, because we definitely don't want to love and let somebody take advantage of us. That's not a good idea. But that we want to love in a way that means that no one could ever take advantage of us. That love is such a power that we are not fixated on one person's response, that we do it because God is designing us to do it and we can't do anything else. And that we feel that freedom, and that we keep listening to God for where to go and how to go, and know that that means we can never get stuck in a situation where we're treated badly, but that we don't withhold our love despite it. So it's a fine line. It never justifies abuse or harm at all in any situation. And I think that real love from God moves us out of any situation that would be one where we would get treated badly. So really listening to that way, because we love others as we love ourselves, not instead. And I think that's really key to unconditional love. We don't love others and put ourselves aside. We love others as we love ourselves. And so the love empowers us and strengthens us, and we're able to give it, and without worrying about others' reactions or others' responses. We're not looking for that. We're loving because we're designed to do that. So I hope that's a little helpful answer. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. It was a pleasure to be with you today. And if you have other questions that you just want answered privately, I'll sign off the video and I'll just be here. If you have any more comments, you can type them in the question and answer box. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.